Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of the musician, writer, and also actor Rob Munk, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, and poetry, and lots more besides. Has a new album coming out called Phased Out, which is going to be released on Magic Door label. And he's had a life in early years of music, then a bit of acting, then coming back into the music world. But you're going to find out much more in this interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years and the musical awakening. Anyway, Rob, tell us what happened.
I don't know if it was anything specific. I had older brothers, which I think is always, or older, I think older siblings are always just sort of a great leader into music and kind of what was cool. And
Yes.
and I had like a blended family with stepbrothers and brothers who were all kind of into different stuff. So I had some older stepbrothers who were listening to like Elvis Costello and television when I was like 7 or 8 or 9. So I was exposed to that. But I had another brother who was really into pop. So he would listen to Casey Kasem. I don't know if you're familiar. You know who Casey Kasem is? Do they have that in England?
Casey.
He did the top 40 countdown every weekend, like from the Billboard charts. It was like a syndicated radio show, and it's actually still on Sirius XM. They have it still, so you can go back in time. It'll be like April, 22nd, 1973, and hear like the top 40 songs. But it was a lot of like AM pop, and that I think was like the stuff that maybe stuck with me the most. But I listened to a lot of metal and hard rock, and then like around like the late 80s, I had an older brother who was starting to get into what they called college radio back then, which was all kind of indie stuff. And so I sort of turned away from mainstream rock and classic rock and started hearing, bands like REM and the Replacements. I love the Replacements. And I just, I started to turn more towards, more interesting music, I think.
Yeah,
and then,
interesting. And were your parents or, step parents, were they at all musical? Did they have a kind of a musical influence on you at all?
My stepfather, my parents weren't that into music. My stepfather liked a lot of 40s stuff. He was older and he loved a lot of Billie Holiday and, kind of like some big band stuff and Ella Fitzgerald, kind of jazz singers. And I like that too. I loved Billie Holiday.
What about Glenn Miller and the Andrews Sisters? Did you?
Oh yeah. All that stuff too.
Well, we had, because I grew up in a village, and it had, and you probably, I don't know if you must know, but we had a lot of Second World War aerodromes in East Anglia, which is on the side that I'm based on, the east side, which is nearest Europe. So there was like, I don't know, 30 odd aerodromes, and they were all sort of populated with the American servicemen and women. And so there was a lot of, like Glenn Miller played in Hellsworth, which was very close. And I was from a small village called Metfield, and we had an aerodrome as well. So the American kind of influence was slightly still there with my parents' generation, who can remember this amazing experience of suddenly going from very rural village life to suddenly, all these 3,000 Americans appearing suddenly almost with planes. I mean, no one had seen a plane before, let alone sort of an aerodrome and sewage, people, electricity, cinemas, bowling alleys, this was village life in the 30s, would have had nothing like that, and suddenly this very sort of strange world, which is kind of a long way of saying that, big bands suddenly appeared in our area, before I was born. But yes, the legacy was still there. People had said, oh yes, that's the aerodrome that Glenn Miller played. And that was where, every aerodrome had their own band, which was always based on big band. And because that was my playground, was the aerodrome. So we became quite obsessed with, finding out more information about that period of modern history, really. So,
It's kind of the American invasion, I suppose, as opposed to the British invasion.
They called it the friendly invasion, didn't they? So there you go. So the special relationship, which was all very nice. Yeah. So because it was interesting you mentioned the older brother, because I had two older brothers. One wasn't really that into music in a passionate way, but the other was, and it was all the prog stuff of the 70s that he had and he loved, and I also loved it because I was kind of curious, and also, you're forbidden to listen to these records when he wasn't about. So one obviously sneaked in and listened to these records with great enthusiasm and curiosity, because, Rick Wakeman's solo work, as well as, all the other bits and pieces, Vangelis and, Genesis, all that kind of malarkey. So it was interesting. And what was
Gentle Giant in that group too?
No, bizarrely. Giant? I mean, I've often wondered why there were certain, he had the Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest, but, and I think he had a Camel album, but not Gentle Giant, actually, which was very strange. And I've also, and interesting enough, and I'm desperate to try and get hold of one of the members, because a lot of indie bands from the 80s did they worked with a producer who was one of them, a member of Gentle Giant, and they said he was just such a nice guy and such a lovely bloke, and his wife would come through and listen to the song and almost give it a nod of approval, and they knew they had got a good take, and it was like, God, I really would love to meet him, but interview him for the show, because it was very strange when they went, mentioned a member of Gentle Giant being a really good producer for indie bands. So I thought, interesting. But they're still going, so it's all good. We're lucky actually on that. So what was your kind of first gig you went to at this stage?
I think the first concert I went to was Steel Pulse.
Right. A bit of roots reggae.
It was. I was in. My parents had like a country home up in the Catskills, which is like a mountain range above New York, which is kind of that's where like Woodstock. I don't know if you've heard of Woodstock, the festival, but there's a little town there which has kind of become kind of this afterglow of that festival. It's real hippie, kind of a hippie town. And we were just walking around one day and heard some music, and I saw Steel Pulse. That was really cool. I thought that was really cool. And I had like a reggae kind of phase in high school.
Yeah. Was that during the 80s, by the way? I'm trying to get a sort of idea.
Yeah. That would have been like late 80s,
right?
Probably. So.
Because in this country, we had our great DJ called John Peel, who used to play a lot of alternative stuff. And obviously, and I became obsessed with John Peel in the 80s and, recorded his show every evening, for 45 minutes on my trusty TDK D90 cassette. And so I think anything he played, I wanted to like. Even some of it I couldn't. But the roots reggae stuff was huge, so I got obsessed with all those bands like Steel Pulse and Misty and Roots and Aswad and Sly and Robbie. They would do this thing called the Taxi Gang, where they'd play for 3 hours and have a different front man or front woman. Most of it was a man, actually, who would just go out and do their little set. And we just, I didn't smoke, but frankly, one got stoned because it was just so thick with smoke, really. So there you go. They were quite something, those gigs.
Yeah. My friend, I have a close friend who's in a band that did a Peel session, which always sounded really
neat. My God, who was that?
He's in a band called Polvo. They ever hear of an American band called Polvo from Chapel Hill, which is kind of like Peel LVO. They were they're on a label called Merge back in the 90s, and they were actually sort of influenced by prog a little bit. If you ever listen to them, I think you might dig them. They were put out a bunch of records on Merge, and then they kind of disappeared. He still does other stuff now, but but he did a session with like a Peel session that I always felt like kind of a big thing.
That's just like, that's the whole, that's like, you get that moment, don't you? So when did you sort of start to sort of veer towards being in a band rather than just being a fanboy like myself?
In high school, I played in the talent show, and we did we did a talent show in high school in like 1986 or something, and we did Velvet Underground's Heroin, and I don't know, we're just and then I was in a band. I was in like a cover band in high school, and a lot of the guys in the band like the Grateful Dead, which I did not at the time. Being aggressively not like them, so I'd sort of stand off to the side of the stage, and then I would come out and sing the songs that I sang, which were like some Trog songs and the Doors and the Buzzcocks, and it was kind of all over the place. Jonathan Richman.
Yes.
Those are some of the covers that we did. And then when I went to college, I played in a band with some friends that I met there and started to take it more and more seriously. And then in like 1990, maybe moved to Boston, which is where I was going to university outside of Boston, and then went to Boston. And I sort of fell in immediately with a scene that was becoming successful. Like, I don't know if you know bands like the Blake Babies or Juliana Hatfield or the Lemonheads. Like, I started hanging around with bands like that, and I had a roommate who was in a successful kind of punk band called Bullet La Volta, and they got signed to RCA back when they were signing all the grunge bands. There was just a lot. It was a very exciting time. So I was in Boston playing in a band that wasn't great, but I started to feel what this life could be, and got really excited.
Yeah,
and
because I know Julian Hatfield, because I managed to interview her, and I know the Lemonheads, but I didn't get to meet him. But there was another band who were kind of quite more of a wacky band from Boston, which they did something like Jackie Onassis something, and there was something, it was a title which probably had the word sex in, which I can't quite remember, but they were kind of the drummer went on to be in Sugar, and I don't know if that rings a bell, but
that's Bob Mould's band. Yeah, I don't remember which band that is. There was a lot of, it was like a big scene at the time. And it was kind of all over the place. There was the Mighty Boss Tones, which are, the Mighty Boss Tones, which was ska.
We loved a bit of ska, didn't we? So yeah. So look, I'm just going to have to tell you what this band was, because then you'll go, oh yeah, that band, we loved them. His name was Malcolm Travis, and he was in a band called Human Sexual Response.
Human Sexual Response. Yeah, I remember the name. I don't remember the band.
Yes,
but I remember the name. But Mission of Burma was there at the time, and Volcano Sons was offshoot of that.
So did you get this book? This one, which is kind of this guy who did all the Boston bands from that period.
No, that looks cool. Is he managed them, or is it?
No, he was the photographer there.
Oh, cool.
So he was telling me about the Boston scene, which I hadn't sort of realised. Obviously, been in Norwich, and because he said all the British bands would go and play in Boston. So if you were in Boston at that period, you just got to see just every band before they went to New York and did their tour of the East Coast. So he was a young kid who photographed them all and then put the negatives in a shoebox until about 3 years ago, and then went, "Hey, you've got some great pictures. You should look." So
I liked a lot. So you're from. There's a lot of great British bands too coming out in the late '80s out of England as well.
Well, I because that period, I was too young for punk, and post-punk again, not really quite there for it at that stage, which obviously. But it was kind of 83, it was the years of the Smiths when they kind of started to appear and do their thing. And then I suppose I was just that age where I started going to gigs. It was a kind of religious experience for the next, X amount of years. So there was all that world of people like the June Brides and the Go-Betweens and the Triffids and the Wedding Present, all the indie bands. And there was a kind of I put it as a 5-year kind of period of, like with the Smiths going until 87, and they broke up. And then there was a bit of a like, oh, this is a bit strange. And then, Ecstasy comes along, that kind of changes the musical bit. And also what I've gathered from doing this is that, you get the next wave of kind of teenagers who want their band and they want to discover their new artist. They don't want somebody who's been around the block and been snogging somebody else. They want to find somebody who's new and fresh, don't they? So there you go.
They want their own scene.
They want to discover that new single and think they're the only one who know that band, and that band are singing to them individually. So so you came along with your musical moment kind of towards the late 80s, which in the UK was things like I suppose there's that shoegazy scene, wasn't there? Like My Bloody Valentine and the Sundays as well came along, and then there was a lot of bands on Sarah Records, which were also, the Introverts. But then we had 4AD, and they had the Pixies and Throw Muses, and then we had obviously Bleach, Nirvana, Bleach album, which no one liked. But I went to see them on that tour, supporting Tad.
That's a great record. I love that record.
I loved that record. I thought Nevermind. I didn't really get into Nevermind until years afterwards. I thought that's all right, but everyone likes them. See, I was one of those irritating people who only thought the first album was any good. So Apart from the Smiths, their first album was dreadful, but that's a different story. But that side one of Bleach is brilliant. So it just
Love it.
Yeah, and John Peel had this compilation called Sub Pop 100, and I remember him playing tracks on it, and it was just awesome. So at that stage, that was good. So what did you study at university at this stage?
Creative writing.
Right. So you were definitely going for the arts.
Yeah, I was always more into the arts. I couldn't. I didn't fare very well in the math and sciences.
No.
I liked reading and I liked writing, and yeah, I was doing that until after Boston, I went down to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Which I don't know if you're familiar at all with that scene, but there was a great scene in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the '90s. And it was like bands like Superchunk. I don't know if you're familiar, Archers of Loaf.
Oh yes.
Pulvo, the aforementioned Pulvo. There's just a lot of great bands and very supportive, cool scene.
Yes.
Everybody worked in restaurants, and I managed a club, and we all went and saw bands every night, and that's what we did, and played in bands and supported each other. It was fantastic.
Yes. Yes. It was an interesting scene. So there was people like, was it Girls Against Boys as well, and bands like that was.
There were DC, yeah, and like all peripherally, there was just there's a band called Versus. They were from New York, actually. Unwound, like all kind of like Sebado. Like these are all kind of big bands at the time that we liked and liked to emulate. The band I was in back there.
It's interesting because one thing I've noticed with the USA is that each region has a real scene, doesn't it? Whereas I know the UK does a bit, but we are such a small country that, you just literally sort of, it's not quite like, we get that one scene and you have to be in a band. Yeah, it's just very different, isn't it? When people have spoken about traveling sort of, I don't know, 9 hours to go to a gig to see their favorite band play, and you think 9 hours. I felt so bad because sometimes that's an hour in the car. I can't be bothered to go. And now, and then someone says, "Oh yeah, we spent 9 hours driving somewhere to see a band." You think, "Oh God, that's more commitment than I had." So,
oh yeah, that's way too much time. But I think the internet kind of changed all that for the worse. Sadly, maybe it's for the better. But I think like things just kind of get flattened out, and streaming. The fact that like you don't have to start a scene locally and then tour and like gradually build up. You could be people in Hawaii could know me tomorrow, just because of the internet, which never happened before. So I think these kind of scenes that germinated and grew naturally and were, geography was important. Yes. I'm not sure that that's still going to happen in quite the same way.
No, that one. Well, I suppose, it's kind of one of those narratives, isn't it? Especially from the 80s, where most bands, they had 12 months, a 12-month honeymoon period, but, young people hanging out, just playing lots of music and doing what you do, drinking and smoking. And then, getting a single, John Peel played at John Peel Session, first album, little transit van going around all the little indie clubs in the UK. And there's nothing better to do. And then the second album, or third if you're lucky, and that's it, which is quite nice and sort of, wholesome really, isn't it, when you look at it like that, because it's a clean narrative.
Yeah. And it's also, it was just fun to be a part of a scene. I think I heard a little bit about like stuff that's happening in London now. Like there's like sort of like maybe a London scene, but like, like the Manchester thing. Like, I don't know if that'll happen again. Because like a bunch of like sounding bands from the same town. I don't know. We'd love to sit back and see, or like a Chapel Hill or a Seattle or or any of these like kind of cities that kind of blow up, and become their like a sort of a media moment. I don't know if it's going to happen again, but we'll see.
Well, I think it was Cherry Red Records, who's the label in the UK that they put out new stuff, but they do buy lots of catalogs and labels from decades ago and reissue stuff, and they put out a Liverpool compilation from a period from the late 70s to mid 80s, I think that was a 5 CD box set, and then they did one on Manchester. That was a 7 CD box set, and then one from Sheffield, because Sheffield had that kind of slightly avant-garde electronic kind of vibe to it, with people, from that kind of scene, so there was this kind of rather strange and slightly, curious and interesting time. And I think, they've done one on, I was just responding to what you said about the regions did have their scene and their different. It was a place and a time, and it would never be repeated, basically. And and there was also in the UK in the 80s, we were very poor, so there was a sort of slight element. There wasn't much else to do, and there's a bit of desperation, and you might as well do this as because there's not much else. And I know that's a bit simplistic, but it did sort of help the creative process. So and then you had the John Peel show, and then 3 weekly music papers like the NME Sounds and Melody Maker, which obviously again helps the creative process as well. So there you go.
There was a British band called Love and Rockets that I liked a lot from that time as well.
The Bauhaus people.
Yeah, the Bauhaus people.
The Bauhaus.
They had a record called Seventh Dream of Teenage Heaven that was a great record.
It's funny, I prefer Pete Murphy's solo stuff than I do Bauhaus. Shouldn't really admit that, should I? But there you go.
He's not coming after you. It's okay.
No, he'll be able to sleep. Okay. So look, so when did you? So rhythm guitar. Were you always a guitarist at this stage?
No, I started playing. I taught myself like kind of, in my late teens and early 20s. But I'm not a good guitar player. I just kind of use it in service to write songs. And there are bands where I've been the front man, and bands where I play guitar and sing like I currently do, but I don't love it. No. Like if people talk to me about gear, I could care less. I just don't.
You're not Robert Fripp, are you?
No, not at all. I'm Frippless. I've not. I like playing, and I like. I'm self-taught, and I'm not good. I'm not good.
So with your first band, was that Thud Pucker?
Thud Pucker. Yeah, that was my first band in Boston. Yeah.
Your first band. So you put out one single, didn't you?
We put out a single at Athens, Ohio. We met this band touring. I think the label is called Love Hammer.
You're right. Love Hammer Records in Columbus? Yes.
Columbus, yeah. Ohio, yeah.
That's a small label, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And that was and your first single was Hop Frog.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I have the 45 still over here.
My God, it's probably worth at least $5 on eBay.
Maybe $3. I don't know. But
I was putting the package and postage in for $2.
Thank you. But that was that was the first single we did, and then Chapel Hill, I was in a band called Tinsel that did put out a couple records on a label called Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
it was a small label in Chapel Hill called Jesus Christ that put out us and Spatula and Pipe and some Pulva.
So these were just kind of one band, one single, end of.
Yeah, Thud Pucker just did one single. Tinsel did like maybe 3 singles, or 2 or 3 singles, and two full lengths.
You did Finding the Perfect Gift and Quit While You're Ahead.
Yeah, Quit While You're Ahead I feel is better. Like it's just a progression.
Yes.
But it was with my friend Ed Slinker, who I was in Thud Pucker with as well.
Right. Blimey, O'Reilly. So all this time, was this post-studying or were you still studying?
No, I was done. I was done. I was set my sights on washing dishes and, cooking, being a short order cook and playing music.
You got to have ambition at that age, haven't you? That's the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And washing dishes is quite zen. So that's then, because on your press release, did you then do a Ziggy Stardust and sort of say, that's it, I'm quitting music at this stage, or were you still doing it?
I was still doing it. And I moved to New York from North Carolina. I went to New York and I was in a band called The Last Band. 2 bands. There was a band called Crack Eyes and a band called The Last Band. And The Last Band was like a lot of fun, very performative. And we didn't put out anything, but we were maybe the most successful band because we had a very good live show. I was just like a front man, and we would play like these huge loft parties in Brooklyn. And that was like early 2000s. And then I had been an actor as a kid. And I started moving back into acting a little bit, and music sort of went to the back burner. And there was a time when I was playing with this band, and I just felt like I didn't believe what I was doing. Like I was writing songs, but like because I was sort of late 20s, early 30s, I had this disconnect between what I was singing and who I was. Like it was kind of like I was still writing kind of angsty kind of stuff when I wasn't that angsty. If that, like that, I just didn't feel like it was really genuine. And I sort of put music aside until recently when I was able to write songs as an adult, and it was like a different experience.
Yeah, my God, you were having a bit of a Kurt Cobain moment there, weren't you?
I maybe, I don't know. I just was. It was funny because we were playing a show, and the guy that was drumming was really good friends with Yola Tango, and they were at the show. And I'm like sitting there looking at them and knowing like how amazing they are. And I just felt shitty, and like I felt shitty about what I was doing. And I was just like, I kind of stopped. That was like the last show I played for a long time, I think.
Oh my God, you just dropped the mic.
Kind of, yeah. The mic kind of dropped me. Like it wasn't like I just didn't. I didn't. But I think it was a healthy thing, because I think like wanting to be a successful musician is not a career path.
No.
It seems like it at the time, and when you're young, it can be, like for the two people who get to do it for a living.
Yes.
But for most people, you don't really get to do that. And so I was happy to find other things that I could like make. I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to like, make a little money. And so it was okay to put it aside.
Yes.
It happened for a reason, the right time.
So was acting then the thing that you were able to make a living on?
For a while I was acting. I started doing commercials again. So I was acted as a kid, and I kept my union membership, Screen Actors Guild. And so when I was back in New York City, I started to have friends. I fell in with a crowd who were like sort of bridged the divide between music and film. And some of them were like directors and directed commercials and music videos and things like that. And they cast me in some stuff, and I started doing commercials, and that was like kind of lucrative, to do advertisements. And then I got an agent. I started doing that, and I started trying to do film and television, and that became my backup pipe dream. I was like, oh, if I can't be a rock star, I might as well be a movie star, because, that's just what life deals with.
Someone's got to have that murky world, haven't they?
Someone's got to do that. So I went, I did that, and I went out to LA for a couple months to try to like what they call pilot season, when they make all the TV shows. They used to do it like by season. And I didn't do shit. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on the show. I didn't go well. But I started writing again. And this was like sort of like early-ish internet. I started writing a blog about auditions, like kind of an anonymous blog about how humiliating the whole thing was. And that was called Loser Actor, which was seen by a bunch of people. And one of those people was brought to the attention, a friend of mine, Joe Ventura, brought it to the attention of this ad agency called Wieden Kennedy. And they brought me in as a copywriter. Like, kind of like I didn't have any formal writing training with advertising, but I came in as a copywriter in advertising. And that's sort of like how I was able to have a family. And, it was a pretty cool job too, as far as
excellent. There you go. So then we had, the dreaded, lockdown period. So when did when did the music come calling back to you?
Before the lockdown, a few years, I started writing songs again. Kind of ironically, I was in a band that we only practiced twice, but it was called Dads. It was a sort of a concept band, DADZ. And the idea was just to totally lean into like being dads and middle age, and like play with fanny packs and khakis, and just really embrace it and write songs like I'm No Longer Attractive, Heading Downstairs, just like songs that were kind of like about that. And
yes,
in the process, I wrote a song that's on the record called Brand New Buick. It's like the last song. And I realized that it wasn't that funny, and I liked writing the song. And I started to find that I had things to say that weren't jokes. And I started writing songs again. And that's like, I just sort of let myself, kind of do that. And then I started writing more and more songs, and I had, 5 or 6 serious songs. And I was playing with my friend Joe Ventura, who lives in New York. We would just get a practice space and play.
Yes.
And and then that's kind of led to this record eventually.
Yes, well, it's an epic record, an amazing production as well. I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think the single, I think it's the single, "The Ghost of San Francisco," is just stunning, and also there's a really lovely kind of country twang, countryish song called Outbound Track as well, which is just a sort of gorgeous song as well. So and like I said, the production on it is kind of, it's a step up from the, a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say comeback albums, but people who sort of have got a bit of a studio and they've got, bits and pieces, where this does sound like it's a very slick project that's come together.
The producer is a guy named Ray Ketchum, and he has a studio in Montclair, New Jersey, where I live, called Magic Door. He's a great producer, and he's in a band called Elk City, and they do all their recording there as well. And then a bunch of the mixing was done by a friend of mine named Chuck Johnson, who is a composer, an incredible composer. He played pedal steel on that song Outbound Track you referenced. He played pedal steel on it.
Oh,
and,
right.
And you should check out his records. They're they're really, really cool. They're kind of ambient. It gets labeled as ambient country because he kind of takes a pedal steel and runs it through effects and stuff. But it's quite beautiful. And he's also he's great in the studio as well. He does mixing and mastering. So he mixed some of the record and played on it. And Ray's studio in Montclair, where I did everything else, which was a great way to record during the pandemic because you just can't walk into a place with, a full band and stay there and bang out an album the way I used to do it. This was a completely different process for me, but one that I enjoyed immensely.
Did you, with the album, did you sort of bring together a band to put the, material together, or did it sort of come sort of quite over a period of time, each song? I just wondered if you'd got the album and all the tracks completed before you went into the studio, or whether you did it over a period of time.
We built it piecemeal. And that was like something about the technology that I didn't know you could do. Like I could just went in there with a rhythm guitar, and Ray was able to, I played to a click track, sort of like build what Ray called like a spine to the song. And then you could kind of play everything over that and it would sync up. So things were just kind of put on there. I had this guy, Scott Anthony, who's a great bass player. He wrote his parts and he played. And my friend Daniel London played lead guitar. He's a friend of mine in Montclair. He's an actor and a writer, and he played lead guitar. My friend Joe Ventura, I was telling you about, he played a lot of drums, and Ray played some drums too.
Yes. How did Joe cope being a drummer in a drummer's studio, who's obviously going to be very tight on rhythm and beat and the click track? Did he cope with the stress and pressure?
He did okay. He came out for like 2 days, and he had never played to a click track either. But he did fine. He like banged it out. He's just like a real solid drummer. He's not a flashy drummer. He's just like sort of plays to he played on Ghost of San Francisco. He did a nice job. Yeah, it was just, he locked in. He was like kind of stressed out. He'd never done it, but
yes, I would imagine he could have been very stressed. I know I spoke to quite a few drummers who got crushed in the studio with the sort of producer who was a little, with the click, and the producer who was feeling a little bit irritated with their lack of timing. So it wasn't good. It sounded quite horrendous, really. But then also, did you include your members of your family for your vocals and keyboards?
Yes, my daughter Maple Munk, she sang on Outbound Track and Homemade, another song, and my son George, he quit piano lessons, but he knows enough to play some, so he played keyboards on a couple tracks. And then I forgot to mention Megan Riley, who's a singer-songwriter who's put out some records. She sang backup on a bunch of stuff as well, and I think she really helps make the sound of the record. It's kind of critical.
When did you realize that you kind of had material for the whole album? Did it surprise you? You went, oh, actually, from being a bit more of a jokey band to writing, like you said, brand new Buick, and then thinking, actually, I'm going to change this from just being a bit of a novelty joke to kind of something a bit more serious. did it sort of keep sort of going and going, and then you thought, actually, now I've got 8 songs, I might as well keep going and getting a whole album's worth?
Yeah, kind of. I was originally going to just record with a bunch of friends, like over a weekend at the studio, but things went wrong twice, and the plans like totally changed. I was going to sort of bring in some loose stuff, and then I have all these musician friends. We were just going to do a weekend, and then some like family health issues kind of got in the way. I had to cancel it twice, and then I ended up doing it this way. But we ended up a couple of songs. We actually had more songs, and I think there's 2 B-sides like on Spotify or on streaming services that are like the B-sides that aren't on the record. And then I picked up a lot of steam since then. Since the record came out, I've been writing the next one. Hopefully the next one.
So what was that? Like a track like "The Ghosts of San Francisco." What was that sort of inspiration? How did that one particularly come together?
I think I just saw a trailer for a movie about San Francisco. I think it was just about gentrification. Like it started out, a lot of my songs, they gain meaning as they go. Like, I think it might have just been like, I was thinking about gentrification and about like how much San Francisco has changed. It's very, very wealthy now. And, all of Silicon Valley is there and tech and stuff. And I think I was thinking about the way it used to be and all the hippies and the people who made San Francisco, and how they were feeling about it. And I think I just sort of started from that perspective. It was very impersonal for me. Like for a song, like it was I think a lot of my songs are, more based on my experience and stuff. But this was kind of making up these characters, and it was a cool exercise. But came from a different place.
And a track like "Heavy Shoes," this is one that actually you've got Ray playing drums on this one, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did this one come about?
I was just a song about empathy. It was about like trying to understand people's hardships, and I think there might have been a time where I was less empathetic or sympathetic, and like trying to sort of get myself to a place where I could understand people's and their motivations a little bit more.
Yes, which yes, I think we all become a little bit kinder as we get older. Well, hopefully, anyway, that it does.
I hope so.
I hope so too. This is our dream. I did meet someone the other day who I thought, you have got very little empathy, but that's life. But you've got a B-side, haven't you? Strange Desires, which is a bit more shoegazy.
Yeah, that is more shoegazy. I like that track, but it didn't make the record. That and Liver Alarm were two tracks that didn't make the record. But Strange Desires, I think Megan did a nice job on that. And it's not something that we really can play live. It's got like some sort of looping and stuff in it, or I haven't tried yet. Anyway, maybe we'll get there eventually.
Yes. So does that mean that you've got the sort of enthusiasm to go out again and pick up the mic and head towards the stage?
We did it once. We've done one show like a month ago, and I think we're going to try to do it a couple more times. It was scary. Like I hadn't done it for so long, and I was surprised at how nervous I was. I'd just done it so many times in the past, but it maybe been 15 years since I performed.
Yes, for an actor, that's quite unusual. Normally, people can do that. Right, I'll just play the character and I'll be okay.
Yeah, but I think something about playing guitar and singing, and I'm playing under the name. I've never played under like my solo name. I think it's a lot more personal and maybe earnest or something, and I feel more exposed maybe than I thought I would. But I will overcome.
Yes,
and hopefully get better as time goes on.
It's always interesting to sort of work out the process of why one gets the nerves or gets the shakes at the moments, because yes, it does happen to all of us, doesn't it? Where the fear, I think there's that moment of fear and being exposed. Somehow it's quite weird, isn't it, really? And
well, it's overwhelming. You don't even it's not even like you really have you can really describe it. It's not like I'm afraid of X, or it's just like, it is more the fear, capital T, capital F, that kind of takes a hold of you, and there's no rationality to it.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you could have whispered something to your 16-year-old self starting out in this interesting and sometimes confusing world, is there any little bit of advice you might have just said to them as they were sort of about to go to college or university or being part of a band?
As far as musically, I wish I had gotten to the place I'm at now as with my songwriting then. I think I just think it was just more like angry and wanting to sound like a lot of other bands. Like it was just less personal in some ways, and I just wish I would just say, be better.
I guess it's the maturity thing. I mean, the great thing that's kind of happened is that there's that kind of pop generation from the 60s, and most of them, a lot of them are still going and have sort of realized, I mean, they were at the forefront of like, well, no one's done this before, and they sort of realize, well, you can just keep going, you don't have to stop just because people expect you to stop. And people like David Bowie still did the those last couple of albums, including Black Star, which was just like a musical, it was a masterpiece really in a lot of ways. And I'm guessing as an artist yourself and a writer, you've realised that actually there are ways to tackle the next phase of one's life, and the aging process. It doesn't just stop with a teen, the teen sentiment, isn't it? A boy meets girl at the disco and you get married and it's all beautiful. That there are subjects you can sort of
you can
tackle.
you can. That was like one epiphany I had. I went to see the Replacements. They did like a reunion show, and they played in Forest Hills, Queens, and they were awesome. They played all their old songs note for note, but they were very much about being young, bastards of young, and it was about youth and about attitude and I was thinking like, oh, it'd be cool if they did another record as grown-ups. Like Paul Westerberg is such a great songwriter. Like it just felt like I'd be interested to hear what they had to say. And that was a bit of an inspiration for me to start writing too, to try to write something, true. If I could find the truth there, then I knew I could do it.
Yes.
But
I guess Paul Westerberg, some of his solo stuff has been quite reflective and melancholic, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But I haven't followed it as much. I listened to some records and stuff, but it hasn't. I don't know if he's been as active as he was back in the day. But there's. You mentioned David Bowie. There are some people who can really write as adults. I saw Elvis Costello came through town, and I'd never seen him. I was always a fan, but never like a huge fan. But I went and saw him, and he was amazing and a fantastic songwriter. Still, like his new songs, which I'd never heard before, still really landed because he was such a great writer. So he's somebody I would point out that can write as a an adult.
Yes, absolutely. So with the album, just going back to the album, you're on this. You recorded it. This is at Magic Door Studios. Is that also because they're also a label as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they started a label like to sort of like for all the bands that recorded there and sort of created a little thing. It's cool.
Yes. So you were able to release it on that label at the same time as have it produced or recorded there.
Yeah, and then we did. I just got.
Exciting!
Very exciting. I just got vinyl.
A vinyl copy. Oh my god, that's so cool!
With my friend Ron Liberty, is an artist, and he did all the art for it, and it comes in like different colors. I did it on recycled vinyl, so you kind of don't know which copy is like some could be blue, some could be this odd salmon with blue streaks in it.
Wow.
So I always wanted to do like a vinyl LP. That was important.
Yes, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right. It's quite nice
available.
Actually, and it's got a bit of a vibe of David Bowie's first ever record, which is the one from 1970. I think that's the Space Oddity one, which the photograph was done by a guy called Vernon Dewhurst, wasn't it? And his picture was kind of put on a image of a painting that was in the recording studio or the record label studio, I do believe. From memory, it's all very sketchy, actually. So then with that, which is quite handy having the label as well as the studio. So how far are you down the road for the next album?
I'm up to maybe 6 or 7 songs.
Right.
I think. And I've been working them out with Daniel, and then his neighbor Andrew, who's been playing bass, is a fantastic musician. And it's a little bit different in that I've sort of been working them out beforehand. I'm not sure how we'll actually do the recording process, whether it would be the same as last time, where I record and we just build on it, or if we can get to a point where we can record it live in the room and then just put stuff on top. We'll see.
Yes. Was there any moments or results that came out that you thought that wasn't quite what I expected, but let's just go with it?
Oh, in the studio?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Of course. There's always those happy accidents, and also those like train wreck accidents where you're like, oh man, if I could go back and do that when I get out.
Yes. So for anyone who's I mean, personally, I've mentioned The Ghost of San Francisco and also Outbound Track. Is there any other songs on it which you would sort of are either favorites or you would recommend if someone was just about to sort of launch into it?
Well, I have a new music video I'm going to put out like in the next week or so for a song called Run, which is just very quick. It's a little like sort of like, I'm not going to say punk, but it's kind of like a very up tempo kind of piece, which I like quite a bit. I've been liking these days. And there's a song called Homemade, which is a little bit more, which is a very personal song about like, having a family and how it feels for me. And I like that song more and more. It was a little bit of a throwaway, I thought, when we started, but it's starting to grow on me.
Excellent. So, this is so interesting. It's developed a life of its own.
Yeah.
Yes. And do you find that you use, with lyrics, are there some songs that come together quickly and others that you half write and then you have to just leave and then come back to again? Or do you complete everything and then move to the next set of lyrics and so on?
No, I kind of like hammer them for a little while. I think that was one really good thing about advertising taught me is how to edit. I think when I was younger, I would just write the lyrics. I'd write a song and be like, those are the lyrics. And there'd be no, there was no reflection and no craft really about trying to improve it. And right now I spend a lot more time with lyrics. Like I'll really, for most songs, like I'll really work until I think I have it right. Until I know what I want to say. 'Cause I just, especially because I know it's more of a recording project than a live thing. We're not playing out like, twice a week around town or something. So I want to make sure that when we record it, it's right,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Rob Munk for giving me the time for that. This is, I'll give you a link to the Bandcamp page as well in the link, so below in the text anyway. But massive thank you to everybody for that. This has been the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show. Keep it positive, please. Also, all these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.